Hi, and welcome. I'm Midnight Truth, and I'm really glad you're here tonight. No matter where you are, curled up in bed, stretched out on the couch, or just looking for a quiet escape, this moment is yours. Take a deep breath in, and slowly breathe out. Let the weight of the day fade. Let your mind settle. There's nothing to do, nowhere to be, just you, here, in this quiet moment. Close your eyes if you'd like and picture a place where you feel at peace. Maybe it's a cozy room with warm lighting or a quiet cabin deep in the woods. Wherever that place is, let yourself drift there. I know many of you listen to these stories to help you sleep. So before we begin, hit like, subscribe, and tell me where you're listening from and what time it is. It's always fascinating to know who's out there in the night. Tonight's story will pull you in, surround you, and carry you deeper into the night. So settle in, get comfortable, and let's begin. I never planned on moving to Hollowbrook. It was one of those small, forgotten towns you only stumble upon by accident, the kind of place where the past lingers in the air, heavy and unshaken. But after my divorce, I needed a fresh start, and when I saw the listing for an old Victorian house at a price that seemed too good to be true, I convinced myself it was fate. The house stood at the very edge of town, shrouded by ancient trees that swayed as if whispering secrets. It had a towering, slanted roof, darkened by years of neglect, and windows that reflected nothing but shadow. The real estate agent, a woman with tired eyes and a rehearsed smile, handed me the keys without much conversation. "It's been empty for a while," she said, hesitating before adding, "Last owner left in a hurry. Didn't take anything with them." I should have asked more questions. But at the time, I was desperate to feel like I was in control of my life again. A house was just a house. No amount of history could change that. The first few days were uneventful. I spent my time unpacking, cleaning dust-caked surfaces, and trying to ignore the odd, musty smell that seemed to seep from the walls. The house groaned with every step I took, its wooden bones settling under my presence. It wasn't until the third night that I noticed something strange. I was lying in bed, half asleep, when I heard it, soft, deliberate footsteps above me. My breath hitched. The attic. I hadn't even gone up there yet. I told myself it was just the house adjusting to the cold. Old wood did that. But as the nights passed, the sounds continued, footsteps pacing the length of the attic, sometimes stopping right above my bed. I tried to ignore it. Until I met my neighbor. Mrs. Holloway lived across the street in a house that looked just as old as mine. She was in her 70s, dressed in a thick cardigan despite the warmth of the afternoon. She watched me from her porch as I watered the overgrown garden. "You bought the Blackwood house," she finally said, her voice carrying a weight I didn't understand. I smiled. "Yeah, just moved in." Her expression darkened. "People don't stay there long." I felt a chill creep up my spine. "Why?" She glanced at my house before lowering her voice. "The last tenant left in the middle of the night. Didn't take their car, their furniture, nothing. Just ran out barefoot, screaming about voices in the walls." I forced a laugh, pretending her words didn't unsettle me. "Sounds like a ghost story." Mrs. Holloway didn't laugh. "Some stories are real." That night, the footsteps were louder. I barely slept, clutching the blankets tight as I listened to slow, heavy steps moving from one side of the attic to the other. Then, a sound that made my blood run cold, fingernails, scraping against the ceiling above me. I don't know how long I lay there, staring at the darkness, waiting for something to happen. Eventually, exhaustion won, and I drifted into a restless sleep. The next morning, I made a decision. I was going up to the attic. I found the pull-down ladder in the hallway and hesitated for only a moment before tugging it down. Dust rained from the opening above, and the smell that followed was stronger than before, damp, rotting wood, and something else beneath it. Something sour. The attic was empty. No furniture, no forgotten boxes. Just wooden beams and a floor thick with dust. But in the center of the room, carved into the planks, was a symbol I didn't recognize. A circle, with jagged lines slicing through it like fractures in glass. I traced the markings with my fingers, a strange sensation curling in my stomach. My mind told me it was just a prank left behind by some previous tenant. But deep down, I knew better. That night, the whispers started. I barely slept after finding the symbol in the attic. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw it burned into the floor, its jagged lines forming something unnatural, something wrong. It wasn't just a meaningless carving. I felt it the moment I touched it, a pulse, like the wood itself was breathing beneath my fingers. Morning came too soon. I sat up in bed, exhausted, my body aching from tension. The whispers had started sometime after midnight, soft and distant at first, like a radio barely turned on. I had convinced myself it was just the wind slipping through the cracks of the old house. That was, until I realized they weren't coming from outside. They were coming from the walls. I ran my hands through my hair, trying to shake off the unease. I was being ridiculous. This house was old. Old houses made noise. That's all it was. I forced myself to go about my morning routine as normally as possible, shower, coffee, scrolling mindlessly through my phone. But my thoughts kept drifting back to the attic, to the symbol. I needed answers. I decided to pay a visit to the town's library, figuring they might have something on the house's history. If nothing else, it would give me an excuse to get out, to breathe air that didn't feel thick with something unseen. Hollowbrook's library was just as old as everything else in town, its shelves crammed with books that smelled of dust and time. A woman sat behind the front desk, her sharp eyes flicking up as I entered. "Morning," I said, offering a small smile. She didn't return it. "Can I help you?" "Yeah, I was wondering if you had any records on old houses in town. Specifically, the Blackwood house." Her expression didn't change, but something in her posture did. A small shift, like she had been expecting me. "Third floor," she said, gesturing toward the stairwell. "Archive section." I nodded, thanking her before making my way up. The stairs creaked beneath my weight, the air growing colder with each step. The third floor was nearly empty, the shelves towering and cramped together. Dust motes floated in the dim light filtering through the stained glass windows. I ran my fingers along the spines of old records, scanning for anything related to my house. After what felt like forever, I found it, an old, leather-bound ledger titled Hollowbrook Property Records, 1800s, present. I pulled it from the shelf, blowing off a thick layer of dust before flipping through the brittle pages. When I reached the entry for my house, my breath caught. Blackwood House. Built in 1886. Original owner, Nathaniel Blackwood, ***. Beneath the entry was a faded photograph. A man stood in front of my house, dressed in dark clothing, his expression severe. Something about his eyes unsettled me. They were too intense, too knowing. I kept reading. Nathaniel Blackwood had been a scholar, obsessed with the occult. He believed in doorways between worlds, in things beyond human understanding. According to the records, he spent the last years of his life conducting rituals in the house, attempting to make contact with something he referred to only as the Watcher. I turned the page. The ink was smudged, the handwriting frantic. "The door is open. I cannot close it. It watches. It waits, ***. My stomach twisted. A gust of cold air moved through the library, and for a split second, I swore I heard something, soft, almost like a breath against my ear. I turned sharply, but the aisle was empty. I closed the book, shoving it back onto the shelf with shaking hands. I needed to get out of there. The librarian was still at her desk when I descended the stairs. She watched me closely, her fingers tapping against the wood. Did you find what you were looking for? She asked. I hesitated before nodding. Her expression darkened. Then do yourself a favor, dear. Leave that house. I swallowed hard, forcing out a laugh. It's just a house. She didn't smile. That's what they all say. I left without another word. By the time I got back to the house, the sun was starting to set, staining the sky in hues of red and gold. I stood at the bottom of the driveway, staring up at the windows, the attic looming above like a dark, gaping mouth. I didn't want to go inside. For the first time since moving in, I realized I didn't feel like I was alone. The house wasn't empty. It never had been. I shook off the thought and forced myself up the steps, unlocking the door with a hand that trembled slightly. The air inside was thick, still. The house seemed to be holding its breath. I went straight to my bedroom, changing into something comfortable before sitting on the edge of the bed, running my hands over my face. I was letting my imagination get the best of me. That was all. Then I heard it. A whisper. Clearer than before. Right next to my ear. I shot up from the bed, my heart hammering against my ribs. My eyes darted around the room, searching for something, anything. But there was nothing there. I took a shaky breath, trying to calm myself. But as I turned toward the door, my stomach dropped. The attic ladder was down. I knew I hadn't left it that way. A wave of nausea rolled through me as I stepped closer, staring up into the darkness above. The opening yawned like a void, the air around it colder than the rest of the house. A single, muffled thump echoed from the attic. Something was up there. I stepped back, my breath coming fast. Every instinct in me screamed to leave, to get in my car and never come back. But then the whisper came again. This time, it wasn't distant. It wasn't hidden in the walls. It was right behind me. And it said my name. I spun around so fast I nearly lost my balance. My heart was pounding so hard it hurt, my pulse throbbing in my ears. The room was empty. No shadows shifting in the corners, no figure standing in the doorway. But I knew what I had heard. Someone, or something, had whispered my name. The attic ladder still hung open, a black void above me, swallowing the dim light from the hallway. My breath came fast and shallow as I backed away from it, my skin prickling with cold sweat. I needed to leave. Right now. I grabbed my keys from the nightstand, my fingers shaking as I clutched them. But as I turned toward the front door, something changed. The house, its very presence, shifted. The air grew thick, pressing in against me, heavy with something unseen. And then, just as I reached for the doorknob, the whisper came again. Only this time, it wasn't a single voice. It was many. A chorus of murmurs, overlapping, tangled, rising and falling in a rhythmic cadence. The sound slithered through the walls, under the floorboards, behind me, around me. I clenched my teeth, squeezing my eyes shut. It's not real. It's not real. It's just the wind, just my imagination. But deep down, I knew that was a lie. I turned slowly, my body stiff with fear. The whispers didn't stop. If anything, they grew louder, more insistent. They weren't words I could understand, just hushed, urgent sounds, like a conversation happening just out of earshot. And then something moved. Upstairs. A slow, dragging noise, like something heavy being pulled across the floor. It came from the attic. I stared up at the opening, my mouth dry, my stomach twisting into knots. Something was up there. I swallowed hard, my throat tight. I could leave. Just turn around, walk out, get in my car, and never come back. I could find a motel, crash at a coworker's place, hell, even sleep in the car if I had to. But instead, I found myself reaching for the ladder. Why? I didn't know. Maybe some stupid part of me needed to prove to myself that there was nothing there, that I wasn't losing my mind. The wood felt cold beneath my fingertips as I gripped the sides of the ladder. I hesitated, my heart hammering, then placed my foot on the first rung. The house held its breath. Another step. Then another. The closer I got, the stronger the cold became, seeping into my skin, my bones. The darkness above swallowed everything. My phone's flashlight was the only thing cutting through it, a weak, flickering glow that barely illuminated the attic. I pulled myself up, my head breaching the entrance. My breath misted in front of me. It was freezing. The attic was just as I had left it. Boxes stacked haphazardly, dust thick in the air. But something was different. The carved symbol in the floor. It was glowing. Not brightly. Just a faint, pulsing ember of deep red, like something smoldering beneath the wood. I stared, my chest tightening. That wasn't possible. Then, movement. In the farthest corner, where the shadows pooled thickest, something shifted. A shape, hunched and wrong, its outline barely distinguishable from the darkness. I froze, my blood turning to ice. The shape twitched. Moved. And then, slowly, deliberately. It stood up. I sucked in a sharp breath, every muscle in my body locking in place. The thing was tall, impossibly tall, its limbs too long, too thin. Its head tilted at an unnatural angle, its presence radiating something wrong, something ancient. The attic seemed to shrink around me. The whispers rose again, more frantic now, pressing against my ears, my skull, my mind. The thing took a step forward. I scrambled back, my hands fumbling against the edge of the attic opening, my foot missing a rung on the ladder. I slipped, my stomach lurching as I lost my grip. The last thing I saw before I tumbled down was the thing stepping closer, its eyes, deep, hollow pits, locking onto mine. And then I fell. The impact knocked the breath from my lungs. Pain shot through my side as I crashed onto the hallway floor, my head smacking against the wood. My vision blurred, darkness creeping at the edges. Somewhere above me, the whispers turned into something else. Laughter. Low, raspy, mocking. I forced myself up, my body screaming in protest. The attic ladder was still down, the opening gaping above me. But the thing, whatever it was gone. Or at least, I couldn't see it anymore. I didn't wait to find out if it was still there. I grabbed the attic ladder and shoved it upward, slamming the opening shut with all my strength. Silence. The house was dead still again. But I could feel it. I wasn't alone. I had never been alone. I staggered to my feet, gripping the wall for support. My vision swam, a dull ache radiating from my skull. I needed to get out. I rushed toward the door, not caring about anything else. But as I reached for the handle, my stomach dropped. The door wouldn't open. The lock turned. The knob twisted. But the door wouldn't budge. I rattled it harder, my panic spiking. It was like something on the other side was holding it shut. The whispers started again. Closer this time. No longer hidden in the walls. They were inside the room with me. And then, just behind me. A single breath. I turned, my heart slamming against my ribs. There, in the mirror hanging on the wall, something stood behind me. Not a reflection. Not me. Something else. Something that shouldn't exist. My breath caught in my throat. My entire body locked in place as the thing in the mirror moved closer, its hollow eyes fixed on mine. And then, in a voice that was mine, but not mine, it whispered, "You shouldn't have come back." I don't remember screaming, but I must have. My throat burned, my ears rang, and my vision blurred as I stumbled away from the mirror. My back hit the opposite wall, and for a split second, I was too stunned to move. The thing in the mirror hadn't just looked like me, it had felt like me. As if something had reached inside my mind and pulled out a distorted version of my own reflection. But it wasn't me. It couldn't be. I pressed my hands against the wall, my breath coming in short, ragged gasps. The mirror sat motionless, nothing but my regular reflection staring back. My own wide, terrified eyes. My own trembling hands. But I had seen it. Heard it. You shouldn't have come back. I clenched my fists, trying to steady myself, trying to convince myself that I had imagined it. Maybe I was still shaken from the fall. Maybe my mind was playing tricks on me. Then the whisper came again. Not from the mirror this time. From the other side of the door. Soft, muffled, like someone was speaking right up against the wood. A single word, stretched and distorted. My name. I choked on my breath and stumbled back. The doorknob rattled. The sound was faint, almost delicate, like fingers dragging over the metal. I couldn't move. Couldn't breathe. The whispering continued, shifting in tone, rising and falling like a song hummed just under one's breath. Then, suddenly, a knock. Loud. Sharp. I flinched, my heart slamming against my ribs. Another knock. The whispering stopped. I forced my feet to move. My body felt like it wasn't entirely mine anymore, as if I were wading through something thick and invisible. I reached the door, barely able to hear past the blood pounding in my ears. I hesitated. Then, slowly, I placed my hand against the door. The wood was cold. The kind of cold that seeped through my skin, through my bones. The kind of cold that felt alive. I held my breath and leaned closer, pressing my ear against the surface. Silence. And then, as if right against my ear. A breath. I jerked away, slamming my back against the opposite wall. The whisper returned, but this time, it came from inside the room. Not from the door. Not from the mirror. From the darkness near the ceiling. I looked up. The attic hatch was open again. My stomach dropped. I hadn't opened it. I had slammed it shut. I had locked it. And yet, there it was. A dark, gaping hole. A void, yawning above me. Something moved. A limb, too long, too thin, slipped into view, gripping the frame. Fingers. No. Not fingers. Something else. They curled against the wood, pressing down. Something was coming through. I bolted. I didn't think. I didn't care. I just ran. My feet barely touched the floor as I sprinted down the hallway, down the stairs, through the kitchen. The house groaned around me, as if it were shifting, breathing. The front door was still jammed. But I didn't stop. I grabbed the nearest chair and swung. The wood shattered against the doorframe, splintering on impact. My hands stung, but I didn't care. I hit it again. And again. And then. The lock gave. I yanked the door open and stumbled outside. Cold air slammed into me, burning my lungs. I barely noticed the gravel biting into my bare feet as I ran, half-dazed, across the yard. I didn't stop until I reached the street. Only then did I turn back. The house stood in silence, its windows dark and empty. The attic hatch was still open. A black hole against the night sky. And for a moment, just before I looked away, I saw something move inside. A shape, shifting in the shadows. Watching. Waiting. I turned and ran. I ran until my legs gave out. The cold night air cut through my lungs, my breath ragged and uneven. My feet throbbed from the sharp gravel of the road, but I barely noticed. My mind raced, still trying to process what I had just seen. Had I really seen it? The attic hatch. The fingers. The thing inside. I swallowed hard, forcing myself to keep moving. I didn't know where I was going, I just knew I couldn't stop. I couldn't be near that house. Not after what I had just witnessed. I stumbled onto the sidewalk of the next street, bent over with my hands on my knees, trying to steady my breath. The houses here were dark, the entire neighborhood eerily silent. No lights in the windows. No signs of life. As if the entire world had gone to sleep, except for me. A single street lamp flickered overhead, casting long, distorted shadows across the pavement. I stood there for a moment, heart pounding, trying to figure out what to do next. I couldn't go back. Not to that place. Not to whatever was inside it. I needed help. I reached for my phone, but my pockets were empty. My stomach dropped as I realized I must have left it inside. On the nightstand. Next to the bed. Inside that house. A shudder ran through me. No. There was no way I was going back for it. I straightened, looking around. There had to be someone still awake. A neighbor. A passing car. Anyone. But the street remained empty. Too empty. The houses on either side of me loomed in the darkness, their windows black and hollow. I could see my own reflection faintly in the glass of a parked car, a pale figure, disheveled, barefoot, with wide, panicked eyes. I looked like a lunatic. Maybe I was a lunatic. Maybe this was all in my head. I exhaled shakily, rubbing my arms against the cold. I needed to think. There was a gas station about half a mile down the road. I had passed it when I moved in. If I could just get there, I could call for help. Call someone, *anyone*. I took a deep breath and started walking. Each step felt heavier than the last. The world around me seemed wrong somehow, too still, too quiet. The street lamp buzzed softly, its flickering light casting strange movements across the pavement. I glanced over my shoulder. The road behind me was empty. The house was nowhere in sight. And yet, I felt something. Something just beyond my vision. Watching. Waiting. I picked up my pace. The gas station wasn't far. Just a little further. The wind picked up, rustling the trees, whispering through the empty streets. It almost sounded like a voice, just at the edge of my hearing. I shook my head. No. I was imagining things. I kept walking. And then I heard it. Footsteps. Not mine. Not the wind. Something else. Slow. Deliberate. Behind me. I stopped dead in my tracks, my heart slamming against my ribs. The footsteps stopped, too. I turned my head slightly, just enough to see. Nothing. The road was empty. The street lamp buzzed. A trick of the mind. I exhaled, shaking my head at myself. I was rattled, that was all. I turned back toward the gas station. And nearly screamed. A figure stood beneath the next street lamp. Not moving. Not speaking. Just standing there. I froze. It was too far away to make out clearly. But I knew. I knew it had been behind me just moments ago. And now it was there. My skin crawled. The figure didn't move. Didn't breathe. It just stood, slightly hunched, its head tilted at an unnatural angle. Watching. I took a slow step back. Then another. The figure remained still. But something told me it was waiting. For me to look away. For me to run. I clenched my hands into fists, my pulse hammering. My mouth was dry, my throat tight. I had to move. I forced myself to turn. To walk. 1 step. 2. 3. The gas station was just up ahead. I didn't look back. Didn't dare. I reached the parking lot, my pulse roaring in my ears. The fluorescent lights buzzed above me, a harsh contrast to the suffocating darkness of the street. I stumbled inside. The clerk, a middle-aged man with tired eyes, looked up, startled. "You okay?" I opened my mouth, but nothing came out. I must have looked insane. Barefoot, pale, shaking. "Sir," the man tried again, concern creeping into his voice. I finally found my voice. "I need a phone." The clerk frowned but slid his cell across the counter. I grabbed it with shaking hands, dialing the first number that came to mind. 911. The phone rang. And rang. And rang. No answer. A cold chill spread through my veins. That wasn't possible. The clerk frowned. Something wrong? I didn't answer. Just stared at the screen. The ringing stopped. Silence. Then. A breath. Not mine. Not the clerk's. Soft. Slow. Right into the receiver. I nearly dropped the phone. My heart pounded so hard I thought it might burst. Then, finally. A voice. Flat. Emotionless. "You shouldn't have come back." A click. The line went dead. The gas station suddenly felt too small, too quiet. The clerk was saying something, but I barely heard him. My ears rang. My vision swam. I turned, heart in my throat, and looked out the window. The street was empty. The road stretched back into the darkness, silent and still. But I knew. Somewhere, just beyond the glow of the street lamps. It was waiting. I gripped the counter to steady myself. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely keep hold of the phone. The gas station clerk was still staring at me, his brow furrowed in concern. "You okay, man?" he asked again, his voice cautious, like he was speaking to a cornered animal. I couldn't answer. My mind was still stuck on the voice. The slow, deliberate whisper on the phone. Asterisk, "You shouldn't have come back." Asterisk. How did they know? I hadn't gone back. I had run. And yet, somehow, whoever was on the other end of that call, they knew exactly where I was. I forced myself to swallow, my throat dry as sandpaper. The call, it was from my phone. The clerk's frown deepened. "You mean someone found your phone and called here?" I nodded, even though it didn't make sense. My phone was back at the house. There was no one else there. At least, no one alive. The thought sent a shiver down my spine. The clerk hesitated, then leaned over the counter, lowering his voice. "Look, buddy, you on something?" I shook my head violently. "No. I cut myself off, glancing out the window. The road stretched into darkness, the street lamps flickering. There was no sign of the figure from earlier. But that didn't mean it was gone. I turned back to the clerk. "Can I borrow this again?" I held up the phone. He hesitated, then nodded. "Sure, man. Just, maybe take a breath first, yeah." I nodded absently, my fingers already dialing my own number. The phone rang. One ring. 2. 3. My stomach clenched. What if someone answered again? The fourth ring was cut off. This time, there was no breathing. No voice. Just silence. Then. A rustling sound. Like fabric shifting. Then a slow, deliberate creak, like a door opening on rusty hinges. I knew that sound. It was the attic hatch. A wave of nausea rolled through me. My grip on the phone tightened. Something shifted on the other end of the line. A soft thump. Footsteps. Slow. Measured. getting closer to the phone. I didn't realize I was holding my breath until the voice spoke again. Soft. Almost playful. Asterisk, where are you? Asterisk. I slammed the phone down on the counter. The clerk jumped. Jesus, man. I backed away, my pulse hammering. My body felt ice cold, my fingers numb. That voice, it wasn't human. Or if it had been once, it wasn't anymore. The gas station suddenly felt too bright, too exposed. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, the scent of burnt coffee hanging in the air. It was too normal, too real, and yet I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching me. Waiting. The clerk shifted uneasily. Maybe you should sit down. I shook my head. I need to get out of here. Where you headed? Good question. I had no car. No phone. No plan. I could go to the police. But what would I even say? That my house was haunted? That something was living in my attic? They'd think I was crazy. Hell, I thought I was crazy. But I wasn't imagining this. I knew what I had seen. The thing in the attic. The fingers. The phone call. The feeling of being followed. I took a shaky breath. Is there a motel around here? The clerk nodded. Yeah, about 2 miles down. Pretty run down, though. I didn't care. I just needed somewhere safe. Somewhere with people. I thanked him, grabbed a bottle of water from a nearby fridge, and made my way toward the door. As my fingers touched the handle, a cold prickle ran down my spine. Something was wrong. The buzzing of the overhead lights. The hum of the refrigerators. The faint tap, tap, tap of rain against the window. And something else. Something I almost missed. A shape. Just outside the glass. Standing at the edge of the parking lot, barely illuminated by the street lamp. The same figure. Still unmoving. Still watching. My breath hitched. It was closer now. I hadn't seen it move. Hadn't heard a single footstep. And yet, here it was. I stumbled back, nearly knocking over a display of potato chips. The clerk looked up. Dude, what is wrong with you? I pointed at the window, my hand shaking. Do you see that? He followed my gaze. Then frowned. What? I swallowed hard. Right there. In the parking lot. The clerk squinted. Then shook his head. Man, there's nothing there. My stomach dropped. No. No, I wasn't imagining it. It was right there. I turned back to the window. The figure was gone. Vanished. A sickening, creeping dread spread through me. Was it still out there? Or worse? Had it gotten closer? The clerk sighed, rubbing his temple. Look, you seem real freaked out. You sure you're okay to walk to that motel? I hesitated. Every instinct screamed at me to get out, to go somewhere safe. But the thought of walking alone through the dark streets, knowing that thing was out there, watching, waiting. I wasn't sure I could do it. The clerk studied me for a moment, then sighed. Tell you what. I'll call you a cab. You got cash? I nodded numbly, digging into my pocket. My fingers brushed against something cold and hard. My breath caught. I pulled it out, heart hammering. A key. My house key. But it was different. The metal was wrong, darker than before. The edges sharper, almost jagged. And carved into the surface, barely visible under the dim gas station lights. A symbol. Scratched deep into the metal, as if by something with claws. A crude spiral. A door. My stomach turned. I dropped the key on the counter as if it had burned me. The clerk gave me a weird look. You good? I stared at the key. I didn't know how it had gotten in my pocket. I didn't know what it meant. But I knew one thing for sure. That key didn't belong to this world anymore. And neither did I. I didn't touch the key. I couldn't. It lay on the counter like something diseased, something that didn't belong in the world of normal things. The carved spiral seemed to twist under the fluorescent lights, as if it were shifting, breathing. The clerk eyed me warily. You sure you're okay, man? I swallowed hard. Yeah. Just call that cab. He hesitated, then reached for the phone. I forced myself to look away from the key, my fingers twitching at my sides. My heartbeat felt too loud, like a drum pounding against my ribs. I could still feel the cold weight of the metal against my palm, even though I had let it go. My gaze drifted to the window. The figure was back. Closer this time. Standing just outside the glass, shrouded in darkness. Its face was hidden, but I knew it was staring right at me. I sucked in a sharp breath, stepping backward, nearly knocking into the chip display again. My pulse slammed against my throat. Hey, I hissed to the clerk. You see it now? Right there. Outside. He barely glanced up. Dude, I already told you, there's nothing. He stopped. His fingers went slack around the phone. Slowly, his face drained of color. I followed his gaze back to the window, my stomach twisting into knots. The figure was still there. But now, it was smiling. A wide, gaping grin, far too big for a human face. I felt the blood drain from my head. A sharp, ringing noise filled my ears. My knees wobbled, and I reached blindly for the counter to steady myself. The clerk dropped the phone. What the hell is that? His voice was barely above a whisper. He saw it. He finally saw it. I wasn't crazy. Or maybe we both were. The lights flickered. A burst of static erupted from the radio behind the counter, warping into something distorted, something wrong. A voice. Not human. Not fully. It was low and wet, thick with something that sent my nerves screaming. Asterisk, come back. Asterisk. The air in the gas station turned heavy, suffocating. My vision swam. The world felt off, tilted at a strange angle, as if gravity itself had shifted. The clerk stumbled backward, his hands shaking. Dude, what the hell did you bring in here? The moment he said it, the glass window cracked. Not shattered. Just a single, thin crack, running from the bottom corner all the way to the center. Like something was pressing against it. My breath came in short, ragged gasps. The figure outside tilted its head, the smile stretching even wider. The crack in the glass deepened. A second voice joined the first. This one softer. Asterisk, come back home. Asterisk. The words curled around my mind like cold fingers. I stumbled away from the window. My back hit the counter. No. No, I wasn't going back. I couldn't. The clerk fumbled for something under the counter, a bat, maybe. A gun. I didn't know. I didn't care. I turned and bolted for the door leading to the storage room, throwing it open and slamming it shut behind me. The room was small, dimly lit by a single buzzing light bulb. Shelves lined the walls, stocked with cleaning supplies, extra snack inventory, and old cardboard boxes. I pressed my back against the door, my chest heaving. Something was wrong. Something had followed me from that house. And now it wanted me back. I squeezed my eyes shut, gripping my arms. The cold from outside seemed to seep into my bones, even though the room was warm. A sound made me freeze. A tap, tap, tap against the door. Soft. Rhythmic. Like fingers drumming against the wood. I held my breath. The tapping stopped. Silence. Then. A whisper. Right on the other side of the door. So close I could feel the breath against my skin. Asterisk, open the door. Asterisk. My body went rigid. No. No, I wasn't going to. The air felt thick, pressing in on me from all sides. My thoughts raced, but one thing stood out, clear and sharp. It couldn't get in. Not yet. Not unless I let it. A metallic clatter broke the silence. I flinched. The key. I turned my head slowly. There, on a stack of boxes. The key lay waiting. It hadn't been there before. I had left it on the counter. But now it was here. Waiting. Calling me. I clenched my fists, my breath shallow. I wasn't going to touch it. Not again. A sudden knock made me jump. This time, it wasn't from the door. It came from above. The ceiling. A slow, deliberate knock. Then another. And another. Moving across the ceiling toward me. No. Not the ceiling. The attic. Even though I wasn't in the house anymore. It had followed. The realization hit me like ice water. I wasn't safe. Nowhere was safe. A slow creak filled the air. The attic hatch above me was opening. I couldn't move. A cold whisper slid down my spine, curling around my ear. Asterisk, you left the door open. Asterisk. The storage room door. I had forgotten to lock it. I spun around just in time to see the handle turning. The door handle twisted slowly, the metallic creak slicing through the suffocating silence. My entire body locked up, every nerve screaming at me to move, to run, to do something. But I couldn't. I was frozen, trapped in a moment between knowing something terrible was about to happen and actually seeing it unfold. The storage room felt smaller now, the walls pressing in, the air thick and damp. My breath came in shallow gasps as I backed away, my shoulder knocking against the metal shelves. The door handle stopped turning. A pause. A heartbeat of silence. Then. Click. The latch released. The door began to swing open, slow and deliberate, revealing the dimly lit gas station beyond. But it wasn't empty anymore. Something was standing there. It was tall, its form stretching into the doorway, a shadow that shouldn't exist, bleeding into the edges of reality like ink spilling across a page. Its head tilted, the movement unnatural, almost curious. The lights flickered again, casting jagged, shifting shadows across its shape. And then it took a step inside. My breath hitched. I tried to push myself further back, but there was nowhere left to go. The figure moved soundlessly, its limbs fluid yet disjointed, like it was learning how to walk in a body that didn't belong to it. My eyes darted to the key still resting on the stack of boxes. Was this because of that? Had touching it called something? The whispers returned. Low and curling, slipping under my skin, inside my head. Asterisk, you shouldn't have left. Asterisk. The voice wasn't spoken. It was felt. It pressed against my skull like cold fingers digging into my mind. The shadow moved again, stepping fully into the storage room. The door swung shut behind it. I barely stifled a gasp. My heartbeat thundered, a wild, erratic rhythm that seemed to shake my whole body. The figure loomed closer. And then. The radio behind the gas station counter blared to life. A burst of static, sharp and jarring. The shadow jerked toward the sound, its body tensing. I didn't wait. I moved. Lunging forward, I grabbed the closest thing, an old metal flashlight from one of the shelves, and swung it as hard as I could. The moment it made contact, something snapped. Not bone. Not flesh. But something else. The figure reeled, the shadows around it rippling like disturbed water. A screech filled the room. Not human. Not animal. Something wrong. I didn't stop to think. I bolted. Throwing the door open, I sprinted back into the gas station, my legs shaky, adrenaline pumping through my veins. The clerk was gone. The counter was empty. But the front door was wide open, the cold night air rushing in. I didn't question it. I ran. Out the door, into the parking lot, my breath coming in ragged gasps. The night was thick and heavy, the stars swallowed by rolling clouds. But I didn't stop. I kept running. Past the gas pumps. Past the empty road. Toward the only place that made sense. I needed answers. I needed to end this. I was going back to the house. The wind howled as I ran, the darkness pressing in from all sides. The whispers followed me. Asterisk, welcome home. Asterisk. The road stretched ahead, empty and endless under the thick night sky. My footsteps pounded against the pavement, breath ragged, lungs burning. Every shadow along the roadside felt like it was watching me, shifting when I wasn't looking directly at them. The house was waiting. As I neared, the old structure loomed in the distance, dark and silent against the horizon. But something was different. The front door was open. A cold dread coiled in my stomach. I had locked it. I knew I had locked it. My pace slowed. The wind rustled the dead leaves along the path, whispering warnings I didn't understand. I stepped onto the porch. The wood groaned beneath my weight. Inside, the air was thick, stale, as if it had been undisturbed for decades. But I knew better. Someone, or something, had been here. A single light flickered from the hallway. I moved forward, every nerve on edge. The smell hit me first, old wood, dampness, and something faintly metallic. The journal. I needed to find the journal again. My hands trembled as I searched the desk where I had last seen it. Gone. A soft creak echoed from upstairs. My chest tightened. I turned, looking toward the staircase. Something was standing at the top. Tall. Unmoving. Watching. My breath caught. The figure tilted its head, slow, deliberate. Then, without a sound, it stepped back into the darkness. The light in the hallway went out. I was no longer alone in the house. Silence wrapped around me, thick and suffocating. The figure had disappeared into the darkness upstairs, but the air still crackled with its presence. Every instinct screamed at me to leave, to run out the open door and never look back. But I couldn't. The journal was gone. Someone had taken it, and I needed to know why. My eyes flicked to the staircase, the wooden steps swallowed by shadows. The only source of light came from the street lamp outside, its faint glow casting long, shifting shapes through the open doorway. My hand trembled as I reached for my phone, the cold screen slick with sweat. I turned on the flashlight. A narrow beam of white cut through the darkness. I took a step forward. The old house seemed to breathe around me, the wooden floors expanding and contracting in the quiet. I forced myself to move, one foot after the other, climbing the stairs. Halfway up, a sound stopped me cold. A whisper. Not in my head. Not a trick of the wind. A real, breathy murmur drifting from the hallway above. I held my breath, my grip tightening around the phone. Another step. Then another. The upstairs hallway stretched before me, lined with closed doors. The air was heavier here, thick with something unseen, something waiting. I turned to the first door on my left. My old bedroom. I pushed it open. The room was empty, the mattress bare, the closet door slightly ajar. The walls, once a dull gray, looked darker somehow, like they had absorbed years of secrets. I swept the flashlight across the floor. Something glinted near the closet. I moved closer. A key. Not just any key. It was the same one I had found at the gas station. My stomach clenched. I had left it there. So how was it here? The moment my fingers touched the metal, a chill shot up my arm. Then. A footstep. Not mine. Not distant. Right behind me. I spun around, the flashlight shaking in my grasp. Nothing. But the air had changed. It was colder. Thicker. Like something was standing just out of sight, just beyond the edges of reality. I backed away, gripping the key. The floorboards groaned again, closer this time. The whisper returned, curling around my ears. Asterisk, you shouldn't have come back. Asterisk. My pulse slammed against my ribs. I wasn't alone. But I needed to know. I needed to find the journal. Swallowing my fear, I turned back to the hallway. There was one room left. The attic. The door at the end of the hall stood slightly open, revealing nothing but darkness beyond. The whispering grew louder, a chorus of voices overlapping, pressing against my mind. Asterisk, don't open it. Asterisk. Asterisk, he's still here. Asterisk. Asterisk, run. Asterisk. I ignored them. I had come too far. I gripped the key tighter and stepped forward. The attic door yawned open as I approached. Inside, the darkness waited. I stepped in. The attic swallowed me whole. The air inside was different, thicker, heavier, charged with something unseen. The moment my foot crossed the threshold, a sensation rushed over me, like stepping into a place that had been untouched for years. My phone's flashlight barely cut through the darkness. Dust particles swirled in the weak beam, and the wooden planks beneath my feet groaned under my weight. The attic smelled of damp wood and something stale, like time had stopped moving here. I hesitated at the entrance, my breath shallow, my heart hammering against my ribs. The whispering had stopped the second I stepped inside, as if the house itself was holding its breath, watching what I would do next. The journal had to be here. I forced myself forward, scanning the room. Old trunks lined the far wall, their metal edges rusted. A tattered sheet draped over something large in the corner, its shape obscured. And then. Movement. Not a noise. Not a creak. Actual movement. Something shifted in the shadows to my left, a slow, deliberate motion, like someone adjusting their stance. I froze. The flashlight trembled in my grip as I turned toward the sound. The far side of the attic was nothing but blackness, thick and impenetrable. But there was something there. Watching. Waiting. My fingers gripped the key so tight it bit into my skin. I forced myself to take a step forward. The moment my foot hit the floor, the attic door slammed shut behind me. I spun, my heart leaping into my throat. The sudden force sent a gust of air rushing through the attic, stirring the dust into frantic swirls. I swallowed hard, turning back to the shadows. The shape had moved. It was closer. But I still couldn't see it. Just a vague distortion, like the air itself was bending around something unseen. The flashlight flickered. I knew I had to act fast. The journal had to be here, hidden somewhere in the clutter. I moved toward the trunks, each step feeling like I was walking deeper into something I couldn't escape. I reached the first trunk and knelt, fumbling with the rusted latch. It was stuck. I yanked harder, my pulse racing. Behind me, the air shifted again. The hairs on the back of my neck rose. I wasn't alone. The latch finally gave way with a sharp snap. I threw the trunk open. Inside, a pile of old papers, yellowed and brittle. Books. Photographs. My hands tore through them, searching. Then my fingers brushed something familiar. Leather. The journal. I grabbed it, my breath catching in my throat. The moment my fingers curled around it, the attic shook. The entire house groaned, the walls shuddering like something alive was reacting to what I had done. And then, a voice. Deep. Low. Coming from everywhere and nowhere. Asterisk, you don't know what you're holding. Asterisk. The air turned ice cold. I spun, gripping the journal to my chest. The shadow was right there. Closer than before. It wasn't just a vague shape anymore. It had form. Twisted. Unnatural. A towering mass of darkness that pulsed and shifted, never still, like it was made of something that couldn't decide what it wanted to be. The flashlight flickered again. And for a split second, I saw it. A face. Or something like a face. Features stretched too far, hollow eyes sinking into blackness, a mouth that wasn't shaped right, as if it had been made by something that didn't understand what a human should look like. Asterisk, you shouldn't have taken it. Asterisk. The voice wasn't a whisper anymore. It was inside my head. The journal felt hot in my hands, the leather burning against my palms. The attic floor trembled. The shadow moved. I didn't think. I ran. Sprinting toward the door, my breath coming in ragged gasps. The journal burned against my chest, but I held on to it, refusing to let go. Behind me, the attic roared. Not a sound. Not a voice. But a deep, inhuman rage that shook the walls. The door wouldn't budge. I slammed my shoulder into it, panic rising in my throat. Something rushed toward me. I could feel it. A pressure, a force, coming fast, ready to swallow me whole. I grabbed the key, fumbling to fit it into the old lock. My hands were slick with sweat. The thing was almost on me. I turned the key. The door flew open. I tumbled forward, hitting the hallway floor hard, the journal slipping from my grasp. The attic door slammed shut behind me with an earth-shaking boom. Silence. My breath came in short, panicked bursts. I scrambled to grab the journal, clutching it tightly. The house was still. No movement. No whispering. Nothing. But I knew this wasn't over. The journal held answers. And now that I had it, they knew I wasn't stopping. This wasn't just about the house anymore. It was about what came before it. And what was still waiting. I had to know the truth. Even if it killed me. I lay on the hallway floor, gasping for breath, the journal clutched in my hands like a lifeline. My palms burned where they had gripped the leather too tightly, but I didn't dare let go. The house had gone completely still. No whispers. No shifting shadows. Just the weight of silence pressing down on me, as if the walls themselves were waiting for my next move. I forced myself to sit up, my back pressed against the cold wooden floor. My body trembled, adrenaline still flooding my veins. The attic door remained shut behind me, its presence looming like a sealed tomb. I didn't want to open the journal here. Not in this hallway. Not with the house watching me. I needed somewhere safer, somewhere that felt less like I was sitting inside a breathing thing. My bedroom. I scrambled to my feet, cradling the journal against my chest, and hurried down the hall. Each step felt like a risk, like the house was deciding whether it would let me pass or swallow me whole. The door to my bedroom was open just as I had left it. But something about the space beyond felt off. The air had a different weight, like stepping into a room where someone had been only moments before but had just disappeared. I stepped inside and shut the door behind me. Locked it. Then dragged the desk chair against it for good measure. I moved to the bed and sat down, the mattress sinking beneath me. The journal lay in my lap, old and worn, its edges frayed as if countless hands had turned its pages before mine. Hands that had belonged to people who hadn't made it out. I swallowed hard and ran my fingers over the cover. There was no title. No markings. Just a strange, unsettling sensation when I touched it, like static under my fingertips. I took a deep breath and opened it. The pages were brittle, the ink faded in some places, smeared in others. But the words were still readable. Asterisk, if you have found this, then you are already too far gone. Asterisk. I exhaled sharply. Asterisk, this house does not belong to you. It never has. It never will. Asterisk. A chill crawled up my spine, settling deep in my bones. Asterisk, I thought I could escape. I thought I could leave before it noticed me. But the house is patient. The house waits. Asterisk. I turned the page, my hands shaking. The handwriting changed slightly, growing more erratic. Asterisk, it wasn't always like this. There was a time when this was just a house, just a place built on land with no history. But then he came. Asterisk. I felt my breath catch. Asterisk, the first owner. The man who built these walls, laid these floors. But he wasn't building a home. He was building a doorway. Asterisk. My grip on the journal tightened. Asterisk, he wanted something from the other side. Something that should never have been brought here. And he let it in. Asterisk. A cold gust of air rushed through the room, even though the windows were shut. I ignored it. Kept reading. Asterisk, it doesn't care about time. It doesn't care about who you are. It only cares that you are here. Once you hear it, once you see it, it knows you. And it doesn't let go. Asterisk. The words blurred for a moment as my vision swam. I blinked rapidly, trying to focus. Asterisk, it whispers to you at night, doesn't it? It watches from the corners. It moves when you aren't looking. Asterisk. I swallowed hard. Asterisk, you think you can fight it. You think you can leave. But it's already inside you. Asterisk. The words stopped. The rest of the page was smeared, like someone had tried to write more but their hand had been knocked away. Or something had taken them before they could finish. A sudden knock at my bedroom door made me jump so hard the journal fell from my lap. 3 slow, deliberate knocks. I stared at the door, my pulse hammering against my ribs. The chair was still in place. The door was locked. But something was on the other side. Knock. 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 I scrambled backward onto the bed, my back pressed against the headboard. The air grew colder. Then. Asterisk, let me in. Asterisk. The voice was wrong. It was mine. Distorted, stretched, like someone was trying to mimic my voice but didn't fully understand how a human was supposed to sound. Asterisk, let me in. Asterisk. The door handle rattled. I couldn't breathe. The room seemed to shrink around me, the walls pressing closer, the shadows stretching toward me. I squeezed my eyes shut. Asterisk, you're not real. Asterisk. The air shifted. The voice laughed. Low. Hollow. Asterisk, you invited me in the moment you opened that book. Asterisk. Something pressed against the other side of the door, heavy and waiting. The light in my room flickered, the shadows twisting unnaturally. I didn't know what to do. I was trapped. And the thing on the other side of the door wasn't leaving. The journal lay open at my feet, its pages fluttering as if caught in a non-existent breeze. I forced myself to look down. The words on the last page had changed. Fresh ink bled through the paper, forming new words right before my eyes. Asterisk, you can't run. You can't hide. But if you want to survive, you have to listen. Asterisk. Asterisk, do not open the door. Asterisk. The knocking stopped. Silence. Then. The handle twisted. Not rattled. Not shook. Twisted. Slowly. Deliberately. The lock clicked open. And the door began to inch forward. I couldn't scream. Couldn't move. All I could do was watch as the darkness beyond the door spilled into my room, stretching toward me like living tendrils. And in the center of it, a shape. Not fully formed. Not fully human. But wearing my face. Smiling. Asterisk, you let me in. Asterisk. The last thing I saw was the journal's pages flipping wildly on their own, the ink bleeding into nothingness. And then. Blackness. The house had me now. And this time, it wasn't letting go. Story 2. The house stood at the end of the road, a looming silhouette against the pale evening sky. It wasn't grand or gothic, not the kind of house you'd see in horror movies, just an old, forgotten structure with peeling paint, warped wooden steps, and windows that seemed a little too dark. I moved in on a Thursday. It was the kind of day where the sky looked heavy, as if it could collapse under its own weight. The air smelled like rain, though none had fallen. My car was packed with everything I owned, which wasn't much, some old furniture, a few boxes of clothes, and a television that barely worked. The house had been cheap, suspiciously so. The landlord, an older man with sunken eyes, handed me the keys without much small talk. "You're sure about this place?" he asked, hesitating. "It's been empty a while." I shrugged. "Seems fine to me." He nodded but didn't seem convinced. As I signed the last bit of paperwork, he muttered something under his breath, too quiet for me to catch. When I asked him to repeat it, he just shook his head. The first thing I noticed inside was the smell, dust, wood, something faintly metallic, like old coins. The floors creaked beneath my weight, each step met with a slow, aching groan. The walls were lined with faded wallpaper, the kind that had once been floral but was now just a smear of brown and yellow. The previous tenants had left in a hurry. A few pieces of furniture remained, a rocking chair in the corner of the living room, a cracked mirror in the hallway, an old wooden dresser in the bedroom. The dresser had deep claw-like marks on the surface. Probably just wear and tear. I spent the evening unpacking, listening to the wind rattle against the windows. The place felt strange, but I chalked it up to being alone in a new house. Every home has its quirks, right? That night, as I settled into bed, I heard something, faint, distant, almost like whispering. I sat up, holding my breath. The house was old. Maybe the wind was slipping through cracks in the wood, making it sound like voices. That had to be it. I turned over, pulling the blanket tight around my shoulders, and shut my eyes. But just before sleep took me, I swore I heard it again, closer this time. A whisper. Saying my name. I woke up in the middle of the night, heart pounding, unsure of why. The room was heavy with silence, the kind that presses down on you, making the air feel thick and unmoving. The only sound was the slow tick of the clock on the wall, each second stretching longer than it should. I stayed still for a moment, listening, waiting, trying to figure out what had pulled me from sleep. Then I heard it again. A whisper. Soft, fleeting. It came from the hallway just outside my bedroom door. I sat up slowly, every nerve in my body on edge. Maybe I was dreaming. Maybe my mind was playing tricks on me. That had to be it. The house was old. Old houses made sounds. The wind against the windows, the groan of the wooden beams settling, the faint hum of pipes behind the walls, it could have been anything. But my name? I threw off the blanket, stepping onto the cold wooden floor. The hallway stretched out in front of me, dimly lit by the moonlight filtering through the narrow window at the far end. The wallpaper, old and peeling, seemed to shift slightly in the shadows. The cracked mirror on the wall caught my reflection, and for a split second, I thought I saw something move behind me. I turned fast, but the room was empty. I exhaled sharply, shaking my head. I was letting my imagination get to me. The stress of moving, the exhaustion, it was all catching up at once. I needed sleep. I started back toward the bed when I heard another sound. Not a whisper this time. A soft creak. Like the sound of a footstep. I froze, every muscle tensed. It came from downstairs. I tried to convince myself it was nothing. The house settling. An animal outside. Anything but what my mind was suggesting. But then it came again. A slow, deliberate creak, followed by another. Someone was in the house. I reached for my phone on the nightstand, my fingers tightening around it. The screen glowed in the darkness, but there was no signal. No Wi-Fi. Just a dead, empty screen. My heart hammered against my ribs as I forced myself to move toward the bedroom door. I had locked it before going to bed, I was sure of it. But now, as I reached for the knob, I saw something that made my stomach twist into knots. The door was slightly open. Not much. Just an inch or two. But I knew I hadn't left it like that. A cold rush of air slipped through the gap, brushing against my skin like unseen fingers. I swallowed hard and slowly pushed the door open. The hallway stretched out in front of me, silent and empty. The floorboards groaned under my weight as I stepped forward, trying to keep my breathing steady. I listened, straining to catch any sound, any movement. Nothing. Then, at the bottom of the stairs, a shadow moved. It wasn't a trick of the light. It wasn't my imagination. Someone, or something, was standing in the darkness, just out of reach of the moonlight. I could barely make out the shape, but it was there. Tall, motionless. Watching. I felt a cold sweat break out along my spine. My fingers tightened around the phone, but I knew there was no point in calling for help. I took a step back, my pulse thundering in my ears. The shadow didn't move. It just stood there, silent, waiting. And then, as if the house itself were breathing, the whisper came again. But this time, it was right behind me. I spun around, my breath catching in my throat. The hallway was empty. The cracked mirror on the wall reflected nothing but darkness. But I wasn't alone. I could feel it, something lingering just beyond my vision, just out of reach. I turned back toward the stairs, but the shadow was gone. The air in the house shifted, the tension breaking like a snapped thread. It was as if whatever had been there had simply melted away. I stood there for what felt like hours, my heart still hammering, waiting for something to happen. But nothing did. Eventually, I forced myself back into the bedroom, locking the door behind me. I didn't sleep for the rest of the night. By morning, I had almost convinced myself it had all been in my head. That stress and exhaustion had made me see and hear things that weren't really there. But then I noticed something. The closet door, which I had left closed the night before, was now wide open. And inside, in the dust on the floor, were footprints. Bare. Human. Leading out into the room. Morning light seeped through the old curtains, casting long shadows across the wooden floor. The house was silent now, but not in a peaceful way. It was the kind of silence that pressed against my ears, making me hyper-aware of every little sound, my own breathing, the rustling of the sheets as I shifted, the faint hum of the wind outside. But my eyes were locked on the closet. The door was wide open. The footprints in the dust were unmistakable, bare, human, and leading from the closet into the center of my room. They stopped just a few feet away from my bed. I forced myself to breathe, slow and steady. Maybe I had done this myself. Maybe in my half-asleep state, I had gotten up, wandered around, and forgotten. But deep down, I knew that wasn't true. Because the prints were too small to be mine. A chill ran through me, the kind that sinks deep into your bones and doesn't let go. My hand hovered near my phone, but I already knew it wouldn't help. No signal. No Wi-Fi. Just like last night. I got up slowly, my bare feet hesitant on the cold wooden floor. The boards groaned under my weight, but that wasn't what made me freeze. There was a smell. Something faint, almost buried beneath the usual scents of old wood and dust. It was damp, earthy, like rotting leaves or wet stone. It reminded me of something deep underground, where sunlight never reached. I took a step closer to the closet. The darkness inside felt unnatural, like it stretched further than the small space should allow. "Hello?" My voice was barely more than a whisper, and I hated how unsteady it sounded. No response. I swallowed hard, debating whether I should just slam the door shut and pretend none of this was happening. But that felt wrong, like ignoring it would only make it worse. So, instead, I stepped forward. The moment I crossed the threshold, the air changed. It was colder inside, enough that goosebumps prickled along my arms. I crouched down, running my fingers lightly through the dust-covered floor. The footprints were crisp, recent. But there was something else, something half-buried in the dust near the back wall. A small, rusted key. I picked it up, my fingers brushing against the cold metal. It was old, heavier than it looked, with strange, almost unreadable engravings along the edges. And then, from somewhere deep inside the house, something shifted. A creak. Not the normal kind. This one was slow, deliberate. Like a door opening. My breath hitched. The sound had come from downstairs. I forced myself to move, gripping the key tightly as I backed out of the closet. Every instinct screamed at me to run, to get out of the house, to forget the cheap rent and leave everything behind. But I didn't. Instead, I followed the sound. Each step down the staircase felt heavier than the last. The wooden railing was cool under my palm, worn smooth by years of use. The living room was still, unchanged. The old rocking chair sat in the corner, unmoving. The cracked mirror on the hallway wall reflected only emptiness. Then I saw it. The basement door. It was open. I knew for a fact that it had been closed the night before. Locked, even. But now it stood ajar, a sliver of darkness stretching down into the unknown. The scent was stronger here, damp, musty, like the earth itself had been disturbed. My fingers curled tighter around the rusted key. I should leave. That was the smart thing to do. But something about the open door felt wrong. Like it was inviting me, daring me to step closer. I reached for the light switch on the wall, flicking it on. Nothing. Of course. The basement swallowed the light, its shadows deep and endless. I hesitated, my pulse hammering against my ribs. Every horror movie I had ever seen screamed at me to turn around, to get the hell out. But then, from somewhere in the darkness below, I heard it. Whispering. Faint, just on the edge of hearing, like voices carried on the wind. Except there was no whine down there. I swallowed the lump in my throat and did something incredibly, unbelievably stupid. I stepped forward. The stairs creaked beneath me, each step an uneasy groan of protest. The deeper I went, the colder it became. My breath clouded in front of me, my skin prickling with the kind of fear that had no explanation. The whispering grew louder. It wasn't just one voice. It was many, overlapping, whispering things I couldn't quite understand. But then, just as I reached the bottom step, one voice broke through the others. Clear. Distinct. It said my name. My entire body locked up. The air was thick, suffocating, pressing in from all sides. I turned, ready to bolt back up the stairs, but then something moved in the corner of the basement. It was small at first, just a flicker in the dark. Then it shifted, unfolding, stretching. A shape. A figure. Standing in the farthest part of the basement, half hidden in the shadows. Not moving. Just watching. A breath of ice slid down my spine, the hair on my arms rising. I couldn't see its face. But I knew it was smiling. I ran. I didn't stop until I was back in my room, the door slammed shut, my chest heaving. The house was silent again, but I could still feel it, something lingering, something waiting. I looked down at my hand. The rusted key was gone. I didn't sleep. Not really. Every time my eyes drifted shut, I felt like something was watching me, standing just beyond my line of sight, waiting for me to let my guard down. The air in my room felt different now, heavier, like the walls themselves were pressing in. I kept telling myself it was my imagination. Old houses made noises. Basements were naturally creepy. There was no logical reason to believe I had actually heard my name whispered in the dark. But I did. And worse than that, something had been down there. The rusted key was gone. I had held it in my hand, felt the cold metal against my palm, and now it had disappeared. I wanted to leave. Pack a bag, find the nearest motel, and never look back. But there was a part of me, a stupid, stubborn part, that refused. This was my house now. Whatever was happening here, I needed to understand it. So as soon as the morning light crept through my windows, I forced myself to get out of bed, splash cold water on my face, and pretend that everything was normal. Breakfast was an afterthought. I barely tasted the toast I forced myself to eat. My coffee sat untouched, growing cold on the counter. Then came the knock at the door. The sudden noise made me flinch, the ceramic mug nearly slipping from my fingers. For a second, I just stood there, staring at the door like I expected it to open on its own. Another knock. I hesitated, then moved toward the entrance, peering through the peephole. Mrs. Hendricks, my next-door neighbor. I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding and unlocked the door. "Morning, dear," she said, offering me a polite smile. "Hope I'm not disturbing you." "Not at all," I lied. My voice sounded rough, like I hadn't spoken in days. Mrs. Hendricks had lived on this street for years. She was the kind of old woman who always smelled like lavender and carried around a tiny purse no matter where she went. I hadn't spoken to her much since moving in, but she had always been friendly. She glanced over my shoulder into the house, then back at me, her smile faltering just slightly. "How's the place treating you?" The question made my stomach twist. I forced a shrug. "It's an old house. Takes some getting used to." She hummed, shifting her weight. "I imagine so." Silence stretched between us. I got the strange feeling she wanted to say something else but wasn't sure if she should. "Mrs. Hendricks," I started, lowering my voice. "Did something happen here?" Her eyes flicked past me again, like she was checking for something over my shoulder. Then she sighed, her expression softening with something close to pity. "You seem like a nice girl," she said. "So I'm going to be honest with you." I tensed. "This house," she hesitated. "It's not right." My pulse quickened. "What do you mean?" "People don't stay here long," she said. "The last tenant, Mr. Parker, he was a quiet man, kept to himself. He was here for a few months, then one night, he just ran out into the street. Barefoot, screaming. A shiver ran down my spine. The police found him miles away," she continued. Babbling about the walls watching him. About voices in the basement. I swallowed hard. Before him, it was a young couple. They left in the middle of the night, left everything behind. Wouldn't even come back for their belongings. My mouth was dry. "Why?" Her lips pressed together in a thin line. "They wouldn't say. Just that something in this house didn't want them here." Goosebumps prickled my arms. I wanted to tell her that I had heard the whispers. That I had seen something standing in the basement. But my throat felt tight, like saying it out loud would make it more real. Mrs. Hendricks reached into her tiny purse and pulled out a small piece of paper, pressing it into my hand. "If anything happens," she said quietly, "you call this number. He used to live here, years ago. Knows more about this place than anyone." I looked down at the paper. Just a name and a phone number. Franklin Davis. When I looked up again, she was already backing away. "Be careful, dear," she said. "Whatever's in there, it doesn't like being ignored." Then she turned and walked away, leaving me standing in the doorway, gripping the paper like it was a lifeline. The rest of the day passed in a haze. I kept trying to convince myself that Mrs. Hendricks was just superstitious. But the more I thought about it, the harder it was to ignore the sinking feeling in my stomach. By the time night fell, I had made up my mind. I was going to call Franklin Davis. I sat on the edge of my bed, phone in hand, staring at the number. Finally, I took a deep breath and dialed. It rang. Once. Twice. 3 times. Then a click. Silence. I swallowed. Hello. For a second, nothing. Then a slow, rasping breath. "Who is this?" The voice was rough, like someone who hadn't spoken in a long time. "My name is," I hesitated. "I live in your old house." Silence. Then, a whisper. "Get out." A chill shot down my spine. "What?" "Get out," he repeated, his voice low, urgent. "Leave now. Don't stay another night." My throat tightened. "Why? What's happening?" He exhaled sharply, like he was debating whether to tell me. Then, in a voice barely above a whisper, he said, "It knows your name now." The call disconnected. The room around me felt too quiet. Too still. Then, from the closet behind me, a slow, creaking sound. I turned. The door was open. I hadn't touched it. And in the darkness beyond, something moved. The closet door stood open, its darkness stretching into something unnatural, something too deep, too quiet. My heart pounded in my chest as I sat frozen on the bed, gripping my phone so tightly my fingers ached. I didn't remember opening that door. And yet, there it was. For a long moment, nothing moved. My breath came in short, shallow gasps, my ears straining for the faintest sound. Then, a shift in the shadows. Not the usual kind. Not the way a coat hanging in the dark might sway slightly from a draft. No, this was different. Something was in there. Watching. Waiting. My body refused to move. My mind screamed at me to run, to leave the room, the house, everything behind. But my limbs felt weighted, locked in place by an invisible force. Then the whisper came. So soft I almost convinced myself I had imagined it. "I see you." The air left my lungs in a sharp, involuntary gasp. I scrambled backward on the bed, my foot catching on the sheets, nearly tumbling to the floor. My pulse thundered in my ears as I fumbled for the lamp on my nightstand. Light. I needed light. But before my fingers could reach the switch, the closet door creaked wider. Something stepped forward. A shape. Tall. Thin. Its outline just barely visible against the pitch black of the closet. The air grew cold, so cold I could see my breath in front of me. My body trembled, my fingers numb. Then it moved. Not like a person. Not like anything human. It flickered. One moment, standing in the closet. The next, closer. Just past the edge of the bed. I didn't see it move. I didn't hear it take a step. It was just there. A choked noise escaped my throat, my breath ragged and uneven. I wanted to scream, to run, to do anything other than sit there staring at the impossible thing before me. But I couldn't. I could only watch. The figure tilted its head, as if studying me. The air around it shimmered, warping, like heat rising from asphalt. And then, the whisper came again. Not from the closet. Not from in front of me. But right next to my ear. I know you. The room plunged into chaos. The lamp beside me shattered, its bulb bursting with a sharp crack. The closet door slammed shut so hard the walls shook. My body finally obeyed, and I scrambled off the bed, nearly tripping over my own feet as I bolted from the room. The hallway was pitch black. My legs carried me forward blindly, one hand pressed against the wall to guide me. The whispers followed. Too many voices. Overlapping, indistinct, hissing words that made my skin crawl. I reached the stairs. Something moved below. A shadow shifting in the dim glow of the streetlight filtering through the window. I didn't stop. I ran. Down the stairs, through the hallway, straight to the front door. My fingers fumbled with the lock, shaking so violently I could barely turn it. Then, a breath. Right against the back of my neck. Not warm. Cold. Freezing. I ripped the door open and stumbled outside, my bare feet hitting the icy pavement. The night was silent. No voices. No whispers. Just me, standing in the empty street, gasping for air. The house loomed behind me, its windows dark, empty. But something watched from the other side of the glass. Not a person. Not something that had ever been human. Just a shadow, standing perfectly still. Waiting. I spent the night in my car. Locked the doors, curled up in the back seat with my jacket pulled tightly around me. I didn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard the whisper again. I know you. The sun rose slowly, casting long, golden beams across the quiet street. The house looked different in daylight. Almost normal. Almost like the night before had just been a nightmare. But it wasn't. I could still feel the cold breath on my skin. Still hear the glass shattering. Still see the shape in the closet. I needed answers. With trembling fingers, I pulled out the crumpled piece of paper Mrs. Hendricks had given me. Franklin Davis. He had lived here before. He had run from this house just like I had. And he knew something. I didn't hesitate this time. I dialed the number, pressing the phone tightly against my ear. It rang. Once. Twice. Then a click. His voice was different this time. More urgent. More afraid. You didn't leave, did you? My throat felt tight. I tried, I whispered. But. A sharp intake of breath on the other end. It's too late, he murmured. It's already chosen you. The phone went dead. I stared at the screen, my fingers trembling. Then, from inside the house. A slow, deliberate knock on the door. The knock came again. Slow. Deliberate. Too measured to be natural. I sat frozen in the driver's seat of my car, gripping the phone so tightly my knuckles ached. My breath hitched in my throat. The morning light did nothing to chase away the cold dread seeping into my bones. My house, if I could even call it that anymore, stood in front of me, ordinary in the daylight. The porch was bathed in the soft glow of sunrise, the windows reflecting the world back at me. Except for one. The upstairs window. My bedroom. The curtains were drawn, but behind them, a shadow lingered. Still. Waiting. The knock came a third time. I swallowed hard. My body screamed at me to drive away, to leave this place behind and never look back. But something held me in place. I needed to know. Mrs. Hendricks had warned me. Franklin Davis had all but begged me to stay away. Yet here I was, drawn to the very thing that should have made me run. I forced my legs to move. One step out of the car. Another. The air felt heavier the closer I got to the house, like wading through invisible currents that pushed against me. When I reached the porch, I hesitated. The front door was ajar. I knew I had locked it before I fled. I reached out, fingers grazing the worn wood. It felt colder than it should, even in the morning light. I pushed it open. The house swallowed me whole. Inside, everything was still. Too still. No ticking clock. No hum of electricity. Nothing. I stepped forward, the floorboards groaning beneath my weight. My eyes darted to the living room, the kitchen. Everything was exactly as I had left it, yet something felt off. Then I saw them. Footprints. Dark, wet footprints leading from the front door, trailing deeper into the house. They weren't mine. The pattern was strange, uneven. Almost like whoever left them had been limping. A chill raced up my spine. My gaze followed the trail. It led to the staircase. And then up. I should have turned around. I should have walked back outside, gotten into my car, and never looked back. But I didn't. Because I heard it. A soft whisper. Not words. Not yet. Just breath. Slow and ragged, coming from upstairs. I moved carefully, my footsteps barely making a sound as I ascended. The footprints continued, leading straight to my bedroom. The door was wide open. The closet door was open, too. My stomach twisted into knots. The whispers grew clearer. This time, they were words. Faint, overlapping voices. He let it in. My pulse pounded in my ears. The voices shifted. Now you have, too. The closet door slammed shut. I stumbled back, a gasp choking in my throat. Something moved inside. Not just shifting. Scratching. Long, deliberate drags of fingernails, or worse, against the wood. I backed away, my mind screaming at me to leave. But as I turned, my eyes caught something else. On the nightstand, where my lamp had shattered the night before, was a book. A thick, weathered journal. It hadn't been there before. My fingers trembled as I picked it up. The leather was cracked, the pages yellowed with age. A name was scrawled inside the cover. Franklin Davis. My breath hitched. The scratching from the closet grew louder. I didn't dare look. I opened the book. The handwriting was frantic, uneven. I flipped to a random page. Asterisk, I should never have stayed. The moment I stepped into this house, it knew me. It followed me. Watched me. Whispered to me. Asterisk. I turned another page. Asterisk, the man before me warned me. Just like I am warning you. But warnings mean nothing when it already has you. Asterisk. A floorboard creaked behind me. I spun around. The closet door was open again. Wide open. The shadows inside stretched, deep and endless. Something moved. Not a figure. Not a person. Something much worse. It didn't step forward. It crawled. Slowly. Deliberately. I couldn't move. Couldn't breathe. Then it spoke. Not a whisper this time. A voice. Low. Guttural. But I knew it. It was my own. Why did you come back? The journal slipped from my hands. The thing lunged. Darkness swallowed me whole. When I woke up, I was lying on the floor. The house was quiet. Too quiet. I pushed myself up, my limbs aching. The journal was gone. The footprints were gone. But the door to the closet was still open. I stumbled to my feet, heart hammering. My phone was on the nightstand, the screen cracked. A single message was displayed. It's not the house. It's you. I don't remember typing it. I don't remember anything. But I knew, deep down. I could leave this house. I could run, sell it, burn it to the ground. But it wouldn't matter. Because it wasn't finished with me. And it never would be. I didn't sleep that night. I didn't even try. I sat in the corner of my bedroom, back pressed against the cold wall, staring at the open closet. The door hadn't moved since whatever had spoken to me disappeared. But the air inside felt wrong, like if I reached out, my hand wouldn't find solid wood but would keep going, sinking into something deeper, something waiting. I wanted to leave. Every bone in my body screamed at me to get out of that house, to drive until the place was nothing but a bad memory. But something held me there. It wasn't just fear. It was the feeling that if I left now, it would follow. Whatever it was. I needed to understand what was happening before I could escape it. So as the first rays of sunlight bled through my bedroom window, I forced myself to move. The journal was gone, but that didn't mean I was out of answers. Franklin Davis had written it, and Franklin Davis was still alive. Mrs. Hendricks had said he lived out on the edge of town, away from everyone. Away from this house. I grabbed my keys. His house wasn't hard to find. It sat at the very end of a dirt road, hidden by gnarled, leafless trees that twisted against the sky. The place looked abandoned, paint peeling, windows boarded up, weeds reclaiming the yard. But the front door wasn't locked. I knocked anyway. No answer. I knocked again, harder this time. A shuffle from inside. Then, the door cracked open. An eye stared at me through the gap. Bloodshot. Sunken. You shouldn't be here. The door moved as if to close, but I shoved my foot forward. Please, I said, my voice hoarse. I live in the house. Your house. The eye widened. Then, slowly, the door opened wider, revealing the man behind it. Franklin Davis was a shell of a person. His clothes hung off him like they belonged to someone else. Deep wrinkles carved his face, and his hands trembled at his sides. But his eyes held something worse than fear. They held recognition. Come in, he muttered. The inside of his house smelled of dust and old wood. Newspapers covered the windows, taped so tightly that not even a sliver of light got through. He led me to a small table, cleared a space among the clutter, and sat down. You saw it, didn't you? My stomach twisted. I don't know what I saw. He let out a slow, ragged breath. Tell me what happened. I hesitated. Then, I told him everything. The knocks. The footprints. The whispers. The thing in the closet. His face darkened with each word. When I finished, he was silent for a long time. Then, he leaned forward, voice barely above a whisper. It's not a ghost. I swallowed hard. Then what is it? His fingers twitched. Something old. Older than that house. Older than this town. It's been there longer than any of us. His eyes flicked to the boarded windows, as if expecting something to be watching from outside. It doesn't haunt houses. It chooses them. And once you live there, it knows you. A chill crawled down my spine. But I can leave, right? I can sell the house, move away. Franklin let out a bitter laugh. You think I didn't try? My heart pounded. But you don't live there anymore. He shook his head. No, but it doesn't matter. His hand shot out suddenly, grabbing my wrist. His grip was ice cold. Tell me something, he said, voice sharp. When you left the house today, did it feel like it was waiting for you to come back? My breath hitched. Because it had. When I'd stepped outside, I had felt it. Like invisible threads still tied me to the place. Like something was watching, just out of sight, waiting. He must have seen the answer on my face because his grip tightened. You don't leave the house. Not really. It stays with you. In your shadow. In your reflection. In your dreams. My stomach churned. Then what am I supposed to do? He exhaled sharply, releasing my wrist. There's a way. Maybe. I leaned in. What? His hands clenched into fists. The book you found. My journal. I nodded. It wasn't mine. A chill raced through me. What do you mean? His voice dropped lower. I found it when I lived there. Just like you did. A sick feeling settled in my gut. Whose was it before you? His eyes met mine. I don't know. My throat went dry. How many people have lived in that house? His lips pressed into a thin line. Too many. The air in the room felt thick, suffocating. What do I do? I asked, barely above a whisper. Franklin hesitated. Then, he reached into a drawer and pulled out something small, placing it on the table between us. A rusted key. There's a basement in that house, he said. My pulse quickened. No, there isn't. Yes, he said, his voice heavy. There is. It's just hidden. I stared at the key, my skin crawling. What's down there? His eyes darkened. The beginning. I drove back to the house with the key in my pocket, my mind racing. Was he telling the truth? Could there really be a basement I had never seen? I stepped inside. The house greeted me with silence. But it wasn't empty. I could feel it. Watching. Waiting. I held up the key. If there was a basement, I needed to find it. Because somehow, deep in my bones, I knew. Whatever had started all of this. It was waiting for me down there. The house felt different when I stepped inside. The silence wasn't just silence. It was weighted, like the air was pressing down, thick and unmoving. Something had changed. Or maybe, something was waiting. I gripped the rusted key in my pocket, my fingers cold and clammy around the metal. Franklin had told me there was a basement. A hidden one. But I had been through this house from top to bottom. I had never seen so much as a hint of a basement door. I moved cautiously through the living room, my footsteps muffled on the old wooden floor. The walls seemed closer than before, the ceiling lower. Or maybe it was just my breathing, shallow and uneven, making everything feel smaller. I had to find that door. I started in the kitchen, running my hands along the walls, knocking for a hollow spot. Nothing. The pantry was small, barely large enough for a few shelves, certainly not big enough to hide stairs. Next, the hallway. I walked slowly, tracing my fingers along the faded wallpaper, feeling for anything unusual. The key in my pocket felt heavier, like it was dragging me down. Then, as I stepped into the dining room, my foot hit something soft. I froze. Looking down, I realized I was standing on a section of carpet. That didn't make sense. The entire house had wooden floors. Why was there carpet here? A slow dread spread through my chest as I crouched down and ran my hands along the edges. The fabric was stiff, brittle with age. I peeled at a corner, expecting it to be glued down. It wasn't. The carpet lifted easily, revealing something beneath it. A door. My breath caught in my throat. It was wooden, set flush with the floorboards. A small, rusted keyhole sat near the center. My fingers trembled as I pulled the key from my pocket. I hesitated. Every nerve in my body screamed at me to leave it alone. To pretend I had never found it. But I couldn't. I had to know. With a deep breath, I slid the key into the lock and turned. Click. The door creaked open an inch, releasing a breath of air so cold it felt like stepping outside in the dead of winter. A smell followed. Damp. Stale. But beneath that, something else. Something wrong. I grabbed the edge of the door and pulled it open. Blackness stared back at me. Stairs led down into the dark, wooden steps covered in dust. The walls were made of old stone, rough and uneven, like something much older than the house itself. I reached for the light switch on the wall, but of course, there wasn't one. I swallowed hard. My phone's flashlight would have to do. As the beam cut through the darkness, I took my first step down. The air grew colder with each descent. The smell thickened, clinging to the back of my throat. The deeper I went, the more I felt it. Something was down here. At the bottom, the room stretched out before me. Stone walls, an uneven dirt floor, and something in the center. A table. Old, rotting, covered in dust. And on it, an object. A book. Not just any book. The same book I had found before. But that was impossible. It had disappeared from my bedroom. Slowly, I stepped closer. The air shifted, like the basement was breathing around me. I reached out, fingertips brushing the cover. Then. A whisper. Not from behind me. Not from above. From inside the book. My body locked up. The voice was low, distant, almost gentle. But the words. Asterisk, you were always meant to find me. Asterisk. I stumbled back, my breath hitching. The whisper had weight, it wasn't just a sound. It pressed against my skin, curling around my limbs like invisible fingers. The book lay still, but the air around it rippled. I had to get out. I turned, heart hammering, and bolted for the stairs. But before I could reach them, a hand grabbed my ankle. Ice shot through my leg. I looked down. Nothing was there. But I felt it. Long, bony fingers wrapped around my skin, tightening. I kicked, scrambling forward. The grip held. Cold breath brushed the back of my neck. Asterisk, stay. Asterisk. I screamed, yanking my leg free and staggering up the stairs. I didn't stop. I didn't look back. I slammed the basement door shut and locked it. My breath came in ragged gasps. My hands shook violently. The air was still cold. Something was behind that door. And it wanted me to come back. I grabbed my keys. I wasn't staying here another second. I drove without thinking, hands white-knuckled on the wheel, barely able to breathe. When I finally stopped, I realized where I had gone. Franklin's house. I pounded on his door, frantic. It swung open almost immediately. His face paled when he saw me. "You found it," he whispered. I nodded, still gasping for air. "There's something down there," I choked out. His lips pressed into a thin line. "I know." I shook my head. "You don't understand." It talked to me. It touched me. Franklin exhaled slowly, his eyes dark. "It does more than that." I stared at him. "What do you mean?" His jaw clenched. "It chooses people." A deep, horrible dread settled in my stomach. Chooses them for what? His gaze didn't waver. To replace the last one. My mouth went dry. The last one. The previous owner. The person who had disappeared. I thought of the book, the whispers, the invisible grip around my ankle. Realization struck me like a hammer. "Then where is the last one?" I whispered. Franklin's expression darkened. "Still there," he said. "Just, not in a way you'd recognize." The room tilted. My mind raced. I thought of the presence in the house, the voice from the closet, the thing that had grabbed me. I thought of the basement. The way it had felt like something was waiting. And for the first time since moving in, I understood. It wasn't a ghost. It wasn't a haunting. It was something worse. Something hungry. And now, it had chosen me. I didn't go back to the house that night. I couldn't. Franklin let me stay in his guest room, though neither of us slept. He didn't ask any more questions, and I didn't offer any answers. The silence between us wasn't uncomfortable, but it was heavy. Something had changed. I could feel it in my bones. By morning, I had convinced myself that I needed to go back, just long enough to grab my things. I wasn't staying. I wasn't living there anymore. But I had to face it, if only to make sure I wasn't losing my mind. Franklin didn't try to stop me. He just watched as I gathered my keys with a look that said he knew. Knew what? That I wouldn't leave. Or that I couldn't. When I pulled into the driveway, the house looked the same as it always had. But it felt different. Like it had been expecting me. I gritted my teeth and stepped out of the car. The moment my foot hit the porch, the air around me seemed to shift. The morning sunlight felt weaker here, the warmth drained from it. I unlocked the door and stepped inside. Silence. But not the silence of an empty house. It was the kind of silence that listened. I swallowed hard. I would be quick. Just a bag of clothes, my wallet, my phone charger. Nothing else. I moved fast, my footsteps light, barely daring to breathe. I had just zipped up my duffel bag when I felt it. A shift. Like the walls were breathing. I froze, eyes locked on my bedroom door. It was open. But I hadn't left it that way. My pulse pounded. There was something off about it, something I couldn't name. Then I saw it. A shadow. Not in the room, asterisk in the mirror, asterisk. It stood just beyond the reflection, too tall, too thin. Not human. Its head tilted, almost curiously. My chest locked up. I wasn't breathing. But the shadow in the mirror was. A soft rasp, like lungs too old and dry to function properly. I stepped back, but my reflection didn't. The moment stretched. Then. It moved. Not a shift, not a trick of the light. It stepped forward. Straight out of the mirror. I ran. I didn't think, didn't stop, didn't breathe. I hit the hallway full speed, my bag forgotten, my only thought to get out. But the floor moved beneath me. Not shook. Moved. The wood seemed to ripple, the house breathing me in. My legs tangled, my balance lost. Then. The door at the end of the hall opened. The basement door. Cold air rushed out, pulling at me. A voice, soft as dead leaves scraping over pavement. Asterisk, you know where you belong. Asterisk. I screamed. I don't know how I made it out. One moment, the house was dragging me down, pulling me inside itself. The next, I was in my car, hands shaking so badly I could barely get the key in the ignition. I peeled out of the driveway, my breath ragged. But the second I hit the street, the pressure lifted. Like the house had let me go. But why? My answer came 2 days later. It was Franklin. The call came in the afternoon. His neighbor found him on the floor of his kitchen. Heart attack, they said. But I knew better. I knew what had really happened. The house had chosen. It let me go because it had found someone else. The thought should have given me relief. But it didn't. Because deep in my gut, I knew. The house wasn't done with me yet. And it never would be. I didn't attend Franklin's funeral. Not because I didn't want to. But because I couldn't. The news of his death settled in my chest like a stone, heavy and immovable. I told myself it was just guilt, that maybe if I had convinced him to leave town with me, he would still be alive. But deep down, I knew the truth. He was dead because of me. Because of the house. I spent the next few days holed up in a motel room on the outskirts of town. I barely ate. I barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw it. The shadow in the mirror. The basement door yawning open. The way the house had pulled at me like it was hungry. Was it over now? Had it taken what it wanted? I didn't know. But I wasn't willing to find out. I needed to leave. I waited until nightfall before heading back. The idea of returning made my skin crawl, but there was something I had to do. I had to destroy that mirror. It was the only thing in the house that had moved. The only thing that had looked back at me. I didn't know if breaking it would stop whatever was happening, but I had to try. The house loomed as I pulled up to the driveway, dark and waiting. The air around it felt wrong. But I stepped inside anyway. The silence was immediate. Not the kind of quiet you hear when a house is empty. But the kind you hear when something is waiting. I gritted my teeth and forced myself forward. Every floorboard groaned beneath my steps. The hallway seemed longer. My bedroom door was open. The mirror sat where I had left it, angled slightly toward the bed. Except, my reflection wasn't in it. But something else was. A shape. Thin. Twisted. Watching. The moment stretched, my breath locked in my throat. Then. It moved. Not just inside the mirror. It reached out. Its fingers pushed against the glass, bending it outward like a stretched film. I didn't wait. I grabbed the first thing I could, my lamp, and swung. The glass shattered. A piercing sound filled the room, something between a scream and a roar. Then silence. I stumbled back, my pulse hammering. The mirror was gone. Just shards on the floor. And the shape was gone too. I exhaled, my whole body shaking. Was that it? Was it over? I turned to leave. But then. A whisper. From inside the walls. Asterisk, breaking the glass won't break the door. Asterisk. Cold fingers of dread wrapped around my spine. A soft creak came from behind me. I turned slowly. The closet door was open. It hadn't been before. And inside. There was a staircase. Leading down. But that didn't make sense. The closet was too small. There had never been stairs there before. My stomach twisted. This wasn't right. The house was showing me something. Or worse. It was inviting me in. I took a step back. Then another. But the house didn't like that. The temperature dropped. The air tightened. My ears popped as a deep groan rumbled through the walls, like the house itself was angry. Then. A force pushed me forward. Not a gust of wind. Not gravity. Something else. I stumbled, barely catching myself at the edge of the first step. My breath came in shallow gasps. The stairs were narrow. Dark. Too long. Too deep. This wasn't just a staircase. It was a descent. Somewhere I was never meant to go. But the house wanted me to. The whisper came again, curling around my ear. Asterisk, you already belong to it. Asterisk. My stomach lurched. No. No, I wasn't going down there. I turned, ready to run. But the door had vanished. The walls were solid. And the only way out was down. I stood frozen at the edge of the staircase, my pulse thundering in my ears. The air around me had shifted, thickened, pressing in like invisible hands. I reached out, running my fingers over the place where the closet door had been. Solid. The wood was solid. The door was gone. My breath came in short, panicked gasps. I pressed my palms against the wall, trying to will it to open again, to let me out. But the house had decided. There was only one way left. Down. The staircase yawned open before me, a black throat stretching into an abyss. This didn't make sense. This staircase shouldn't exist. I had been living in this house for weeks. I had opened this closet a dozen times. There was nothing but a cramped, dusty space inside. But now, it went down. Too deep. Far deeper than the house should allow. I swallowed hard. A part of me thought about waiting, standing still, refusing to move. Maybe the house would change its mind. Maybe the walls would shift again, and I'd find myself back in my room. But something deep inside told me otherwise. The house wanted me to go down. And the house always got what it wanted. I took the first step. The wood groaned beneath me, old and damp. I took another. Then another. With each step, the air grew colder. And the silence. It wasn't silence anymore. It was a hum. A low, vibrating sound, like something breathing. I paused, listening. The walls. They were moving. Not literally, but breathing. Expanding, contracting. Like lungs. I gripped the railing, if you could even call it that. It was more like an old, rotting banister, covered in something damp. My fingers recoiled at the sensation. It felt alive. I wiped my hand on my jeans and kept moving. The deeper I went, the more wrong everything felt. The stairs never ended. I turned to look up, expecting to see the faint outline of my room above. But the top of the stairs was gone. There was only darkness. Like I had never been up there at all. Panic surged through me. I spun, gripping the banister tighter. No, no, no. My voice was swallowed by the dark. The hum grew louder. The walls shifted. And then. Footsteps. Not mine. Above me. Coming down. My breath hitched. I wasn't alone. I moved faster. The stairs spiraled downward now, winding tighter and tighter, like a screw drilling into the earth. The footsteps above me quickened, matching my pace. Whoever, or whatever, was up there, it was coming. I didn't want to see it. I couldn't see it. I broke into a run, taking the stairs two at a time. The air turned thick, damp, pressing against my skin like wet fabric. The humming. It was a voice now. A whisper threading through the darkness. Asterisk, deeper. Asterisk. Asterisk, deeper. Asterisk. Asterisk, you belong to it now. Asterisk. I gasped, stumbling. My hands slapped against the walls to steady myself. But they weren't walls anymore. They were flesh. Warm. Pulsing. Alive. My stomach twisted, bile rising in my throat. I yanked my hands away, but the walls held me, gripping my palms with something wet and breathing. I screamed, wrenching free. The stairs. They were ending. I saw it now. A doorway below, flickering with pale, sickly light. I ran for it. The footsteps above me pounded faster. Whoever was up there. They were almost here. I reached the bottom. The doorway gaped open. And beyond it. A room. I staggered inside, my breath coming in ragged, broken gasps. The room was small. Impossibly small. The walls were lined with mirrors. Dozens of them, each one warped and cracked, like shattered reflections of the same nightmare. But they weren't reflecting me. They were reflecting something else. Things that shouldn't exist. A woman with hollow eyes and a mouth stretched too wide. A man with his head twisted completely around. A child with no face, just smooth, empty skin. They all stood there, motionless, staring at me through the glass. Except, they weren't just reflections. They were watching me. They were waiting. The whisper slithered through the room. Asterisk, one more. Asterisk. Asterisk, just one more. Asterisk. Asterisk, then it can be free. Asterisk. Cold horror coiled in my gut. This wasn't just a room. This was a prison. For them. For me. For whatever the house had been feeding all these years. A scraping sound echoed behind me. I turned, my body locking up. The doorway was closing. A figure stood there, just on the other side. It was a mirror of me. Not a reflection. A perfect copy, staring at me with my own eyes. But empty. Hollow. Thank you, it whispered. Asterisk, you can take my place now. Asterisk. The door slammed shut. And the mirrors. They moved. I slammed my fists against the door, panic surging through me. The wood didn't budge. There was no handle, no lock, no way to force it open. No, 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 my voice cracked as I pounded harder. The thing that looked like me was still on the other side. Watching. Smiling. It raised a hand in a slow wave, then turned and walked away, disappearing into the dark. My knees buckled. This wasn't real. It couldn't be real. But the mirrors told me otherwise. They weren't mirrors anymore. They were windows. A dozen versions of myself stood inside them, each one slightly wrong. One had no eyes, just dark, empty sockets. Another's mouth hung open, stretching wider and wider until it split the skin of its cheeks. One was completely still except for its hands, which twitched violently at its sides. And then there was the worst one. The one standing directly in front of me. It was me. Same hair. Same face. But its lips were moving. Whispering something too low to hear. I stepped closer, my breath fogging the glass. What? I asked, my own voice sounding small. The reflection grinned. A slow, unnatural stretch of lips. And then. Asterisk, let me out. Asterisk. A scream built in my throat. I stumbled back, my spine hitting the opposite wall. But it wasn't just my reflection anymore. All of them, every version of me, were whispering now. Asterisk, let me out. Asterisk. Asterisk, let me out. Asterisk. Asterisk, let me out. Asterisk. I clamped my hands over my ears. Stop. Stop. But they didn't stop. The glass shook. Small cracks spiderwebbed across the mirrors, spreading fast. The walls vibrated. The air turned heavy, thick with something invisible pressing down on my chest. Something wanted out. Something was coming out. I had to move. I had to get out of this room. I spun, searching for another way, anything. And then I saw it. A door. Not the one I'd come through. This one was small, barely visible in the farthest corner of the room, half hidden behind a fractured mirror. I didn't think. I ran for it. The whispers screamed. The glass exploded. Shards sliced through the air, embedding in my arms, my legs, my face. I barely felt it. Something was behind me. I felt it. Breathing. Moving. I tore open the small door and threw myself through. I landed hard on the other side, pain jolting up my arms. The door slammed shut behind me. Silence. Ragged, gasping, suffocating silence. I lay there for a long moment, heart pounding, waiting for something to reach through and pull me back. Nothing did. I sat up, blinking through the dark. Where was I? Not a room. Not a hallway. It was a tunnel. Narrow. Damp. Lined with something that looked like stone but felt softer. My stomach churned. It was breathing. I could hear it, deep and slow, like something asleep. The walls were alive. But there was only one way forward. I swallowed down my fear and crawled. The deeper I went, the more the tunnel changed. The stone, or whatever it was, became rougher, textured like bark. Roots hung from the ceiling, some of them wet, dripping a dark, sticky liquid. The air smelled wrong. Like dirt. Like rot. Like something buried. I crawled faster. Eventually, the tunnel widened. I could stand. The space opened into a cavern. No, not a cavern. A room. An underground chamber. And in the center of it, a chair. It was old. Made of something blackened with age, twisted in a way that didn't look natural. And strapped to it, a body. I recoiled. It was human. Or it had been. The flesh was stretched thin over bones, the skin gray and withered like dried leather. A gaping mouth. Empty eyes. It had been here for a long time. The air was thick with the scent of decay. And in its lap, a book. My hands shook as I reached for it. The leather cover was cracked, brittle under my fingertips. I pried it open. Inside, words. Pages and pages of words. Scrawled in ink so dark it looked like blood. They weren't random. They were names. Rows and rows of names. Some scratched out. Some repeated over and over. And at the very bottom, freshly written. My own. A rush of cold air swept through the chamber. The body in the chair twitched. I stumbled back, the book slipping from my fingers. The thing's head jerked. Slowly. Unnaturally. It turned toward me. A voice, dry and cracked, like dead leaves rustling in the wind, whispered two words. Asterisk, you're next. Asterisk. I ran. The tunnel twisted and stretched, the walls shifting like living flesh. The whispers returned, curling around me, sliding into my ears like fingers. Asterisk, you're next. Asterisk. Asterisk, you're next. Asterisk. Asterisk, you're next. Asterisk. My hands slammed against the dirt, crawling, scrambling, desperate. The end of the tunnel was ahead. Light. Faint, distant. But real. I lunged for it. I burst through. Collapsed onto cold, wooden floorboards. I was back. Back in my bedroom. The house was silent. Too silent. The air was still. Nothing moved. But I knew. I was not alone. I turned my head toward the mirror. And saw myself. But my reflection. It wasn't moving. It was watching me. And then. It smiled. Outside, the closet door creaked open.